Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your boy, Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. Now, I know y'all haven't seen me in a long time. I had to put this whole thing on hold because Donnie and I were traveling all over the country. And now we're finally settled into our new home here in Louisiana. And I'll be able to get back on my podcast more consistently now. And as usual, I'm going to bring you a fire conversation. This one's very special, guys, and I'll tell you why in a second. But before I get into that, you know what you need to do. You already know. I know it's been a while, but you already know what you need to do. Share this, subscribe, hit that notification bell. That way you'll be updated whenever I upload a new interview, which I will be doing normally on Wednesdays and Fridays. So also, check out my Substack. It's called Chasing Liberty. I'm putting a lot of great content up there. Support my work, become a subscriber. That helps me immensely. So without further ado, this will be my very first time interviewing a presidential candidate. And I'm very excited. I got to meet this guy in person in Illinois a few months ago. He's a real deal, and he's great people. So I'm bringing him on right now. I've got Mr. Mike Termat. What's going on, brother?
Great to be with you, Jeff, and great to have met you in Illinois. I don't know if it was serendipity or, it was just meant to be by greater forces, but I'm glad that we bumped into each other, and I'm glad to be here with you and your audience, and I love your sweatshirt.
Thank you. Thank you. And did you bring one of those brochures by any chance? I know you don't really like to talk about those very often.
Oh boy, that's going to turn into an inside joke. For the sake of your audience, they should know that I very obnoxiously passed out brochures to everybody in the audience and then went up on stage and passed out brochures to all of the other candidates who were visibly annoyed, but they play along. They have good senses of humor. They know that I sometimes intentionally drive them crazy, and so they were kind and patient.
That's one thing I noticed. I mean, because I had watched videos of the Libertarian presidential candidate debates on Twitter and here and there. But even when I saw you guys in person, it seems like you guys all get along. It's not as, I mean, there's a little bit of sniping and stuff like that. But in Illinois, it wasn't that bad. But you guys all seem to get along from what I see. And now there might be different behind the scenes.
No, it is all good. Everybody does get along. As a matter of fact, the one place where we do punch each other in the face from time to time is on stage. We will say things to run each other down just a little bit, and we all know what's coming, right? Because we've done like 25 of these things together at this
Wow.
point. So, when Jacob says, I got to disagree, and you know what's coming, right? You know
Coming.
exactly what he's going to say. Lars often says we could finish each other's sentences. We could give each other's stump speech. I know that Lars is going to talk about the fact that the system is rigged, of course, about which he is 100% correct. And
Yep.
he's going to talk about the voter bill of rights, which is marvelous, by the way. I know Chase is going to talk about what turned him into being a libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to talk about being relatively young and having disrupted the program in Georgia when he ran for Senate. I know that Michael Rechtenwald is going to talk about wrecking the regime. And I know he's going to talk about how he represents maximum liberty. So
Mm-hmm.
I know everyone's catchphrases and they meet him. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm making fun a little bit, but yeah, each one of those guys leans into it, really means it, and lives up to it. So I'm proud of every single damn one of them.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I mean, unlike like the uniparty candidates, you can never really tell whether they mean what they say or not, or if they're just saying whatever's going to get them the most votes. But with you guys, like I can tell you guys passionately believe what you believe in, whether I agree or not, that you guys actually believe what you believe and you're going for
Yep.
it. So I admire that. So before we get into your campaign, because this is about you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know that a discussion of, me is going to keep your audience awake. Maybe everyone out there wants to go get a roast beef sandwich for just a minute.
Mhm.
Um, I grew up as someone in banking. I grew up a banker. I was in commercial finance. I had gone to engineering school and then business school, worked in and around New York, went back to grad school, got another couple of graduate degrees in economics. I worked for the White House as an economist for a couple of years. I worked as a professional advocate in Washington for freer markets and deregulation and greater competition, especially in the financial services industry, for almost a decade. I spent another decade having launched my own company. We were in the business of educating financial services professionals. We were providing event services, strategic consulting. Did that for almost a decade. I taught economics at 3 different universities. So in terms of economics, I've been around the block. In terms of public policy, uh, fiscal policy, monetary policy, economic policy in general, really been around the block. And then as a second career, when I was 49 years old, I became a police officer. Second career in public service, public policy. I was on the road for 11 and a half years in Broward County, Florida, all as a registered libertarian until just a couple of years ago, from age 49 to 60. A great experience. It's the big reason why I spend so much time talking about the need to change our criminal justice system, to fundamentally change how we manage police officers, hold police officers and agencies accountable, ending the war on drugs, ending qualified immunity, forcing agencies to align their protocols and their values with the underlying principles of their communities. These are things that I think are incredibly important. I know that they're not all obviously federal issues,
Sure.
but I do believe that a presidential campaign can lean into these issues and push a conversation along.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, you set the example. So you may not have as much control over local police agencies or state police agencies, but you can still use that bully pulpit, right? And so I think presidents have done that in the
Absolutely.
past and the present. So I definitely think that there is a role that a federal official can play. So what? See, people ask me if I'll ever run for office, and I say no. I haven't lost my mind yet, because I think to run for office, you have to be a little bit crazy, not bad crazy, but just
You
a little
will
crazy.
someday, Jeff.
Maybe I'll lose my mind at some point. But what made you lose your mind? Like, what made you want to not only run for office, but run for to being the leader of the free world, so to speak?
Well, it started out, I had been involved with politics a little bit in the past. I had worked, I had grown up as a Republican. My boss's boss was George Herbert Walker Bush. He's the guy who famously once said, when they come to me and ask for new taxes, I'll say, read my lips, no new taxes. And
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, he famously went back on that pledge, which was the beginning of the end for me and the Republican Party. But
Oh,
it took a while. I had worked on a couple of presidential campaigns back then, and then didn't really participate in politics too much. I was a registered libertarian starting, I don't know, a dozen years ago or so, longer than that. Went to work with the Libertarian Party of Broward County, was helping them a little bit when a special election opened up in Broward County in District 20, U.S. Congressional District 20 in Florida. Special election. Alcee Hastings had passed away. He was a semi-famous civil rights leader in the Black community in Florida and around the southern United States. A lot of people had a lot of respect for Alcee, but he had ruled that seat for dozens of years, right? So there was all of a sudden a special election when he passed away. Participated in that. I ran for that congressional seat that took almost a year. A lot of campaigning, a lot of standing in Walmart parking lots, a lot of
wow.
passing out brochures, a lot of knocking on doors, right? To your point, you have to have lost your mind.
Yeah. See?
But in fairness, I had lost my mind. I was very upset about the way the politics were going. I was willing to do the hard work to get the message out. And one of the things that I noticed, and the other people in the county who were helping me out noticed, is that the Libertarian Party brand really isn't worth much. There are those who say that the value of the Libertarian Party brand is really about zero. Like you might be able to get more votes as an independent than as a libertarian, which is really a sad state of affairs. Most
Yeah.
people don't know that the Libertarian Party even exists, and those who do, probably most of them wouldn't be able to tell you what it means. And you learn this because you spend most of your time explaining what libertarianism is or what the Libertarian Party is all about. And this I blame, at least in part, on the past presidential campaigns representing the Libertarian Party. I think that we could have done a better job of branding our party. So that's what got me thinking about it. And of course, watching the 2020 election cycle, watching the 2016 election cycle, watching the 2012 election cycle. And I came to the idea that if we put the right kind of team together, we ought to be able to affect this process in a positive way, to push not only our campaign, but the whole party, other campaigns as well, to do the right thing by the way that we see it. And that is to run a very credible campaign and at the same time push an extremely principled platform that really leans into our libertarian principles in order to brand the party correctly and in order to differentiate completely from the Republican Party and from the Democratic Party.
So
that
what
was
does that
sort
look
of the
like
background and why we got into it.
So what does that look like to you? I want to drill down on that a bit. Running more of a principled presidential campaign that differentiates from the Republicans and Democrats. And honestly, I saw exactly the same things you saw in the past. I mean, even though back then I was like, okay, I know my beliefs probably line up more with libertarianism. These guys are whack jobs. I mean, some of them, not all of them, but so what would a principled libertarian?
Only the great ones.
Only the great ones, yes, yeah. So what would a principled libertarian campaign look like to you? Because I'm assuming that's the one that you want to run. So this is actually giving insight into how you would plan to approach this race. What would that look like to you?
It looks. Let me pick three buckets. Not that ought to necessarily. Let me pick four buckets. Let me pick fiscal policy and monetary policy and foreign policy and maybe criminal justice reform. In terms of, for example, monetary policy, I'm pretty sure that any Democrat, any Republican, probably any high school kid could say, I don't like inflation. I think we ought to have less inflation. Inflation is bad for us. Inflation is naughty, right? I don't think you're going to get a lot of pushback if you were to say something like that.
Not publicly, anyway.
On the other, and that's, what's that?
So not publicly, anyway. I think some of these people like inflation.
Some of them do. But I think that the vast majority of American voters, the media, right, they recognize that inflation is bad for us. There are some politicians, I think, lean into it, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
On the other hand, to differentiate, I think that you've got to be able to say, look, Republicans come and go, Democrats come and go, presidents change all the time, and yet our monetary policy remains one of consistent inflation above 1 or 2%. We don't mitigate the boom bust cycle. We continuously find ourselves in a situation where wage growth is being outstripped by inflation. It becomes harder to make ends meet. Interest rates go up, make it harder for us to afford housing, for example. This is a crappy situation we're in. And it's long-term, it's persistent. It isn't, just the Bush administration or the Clinton administration or the Obama administration or Trump or Biden. It goes on and on and on. We need to fundamentally change the way these decisions are made. Not, the name of the dude who's at the top. And to do that, we need to get rid of the Federal Reserve System. And we need to impose a set of rules on how much we're going to allow money to be issued. We're not going to just let people do whatever they want with our currency. Right. I don't think most Americans realize today that the way interest rates are set at the short end, right, the overnight interbank borrowing rate, I don't think most people realize that interest rates are set every 6 weeks by locking up 12 people in a room and basically asking what mood they're in.
Right.
That's not a metaphor. That's actually how it works. And I think most people would look at that system and say, even if it was working well, that would be pretty weird. And I think
Right.
most people would agree that it's not working well. However you feel about having a central bank, if you're like I am, who, I don't really believe that a central bank is a good idea in general, but even, never mind your prior beliefs. You've got to look at the past 100 years of experience and say it just isn't working. Just as a practical matter, set your ethics aside. Just as a practical matter, we need to change this. It's insane. And you need to be able to back that up. You need to be able to back that up with a lot of credibility. Whereas anyone can say, I don't like inflation. But you better have a plan how to get rid of the Fed, how to replace it with a rules-based system. And and it is hard to get rid of the Fed. It's a very powerful organization.
Yes, it
This
is.
is one example. But in the other buckets, I don't believe it's enough to say tax rates are kind of high. I think we should lower tax rates.
Right.
I think that's kind of dopey.
Well, see, and that's
I mean,
the
people
tricky
like,
part, though, because I mean, everything that you just said, I agree with, and every libertarian would, and I think that most Americans would agree with it if they understood it. That's the tough part, because saying I'm going to lower taxes, everybody knows what that means. You lower taxes, less money out of your paycheck, or less money that you're paying, or
yep,
whatever. But this is something that's
yep.
difficult about selling libertarianism, because this is very egghead type of stuff, if you will, right? So, I mean, we
Yeah,
always
you're
say
going to have to
in the
treat people
Fed.
like adults.
Exactly. So how do you communicate what you just said in English? I mean, English that the voters are going to
Yep.
understand.
Well, you've got to start out by saying, look, inflation is persistent and changing whoever's in the White House isn't going to cut it unless you change the way that we make these decisions. We need reform to how it's done.
Hmm.
We need to impose rules rather than allow, these 12 probably very smart, well-meaning people. We,
Yeah.
we, we can't have a system where we're just asking these people what mood they're in every 6 weeks and think that that's a good system. We need fundamental change. And I think people are open to the general theme of fundamental change. So, for example, spending, right? And taxing. I would suggest that we need to tell people that the government spends too much money.
Mm.
And the root cause of taxes being too high, the root cause of debt being accumulated, and the root cause of so much pressure to create all this inflation, all those three things come from one source. The government spends too much money. And so
Mm.
it needs to tax us to pay for it. It needs to borrow to pay for it. It needs to issue money to pay for it, creating inflation. This is a bad system. And we need to cap how much we're going to allow the government to spend. An overall umbrella cap. We're not going to ask Congress, go pick out a couple of programs, because we know that they don't have the political guts to do it.
Right.
So we need to say, this is how much we're going to let you spend. And if you fools in Congress don't figure out how to get underneath that cap, we're just going to haircut everybody.
Mm. Mm. See,
Now,
what I
you
like
probably
about
don't
that.
like that idea.
Yeah, yeah, but that's the thing. But the way you boiled it down is easier to understand. And then as you expand on that and explain why that's going to ease up people's burdens at the grocery store, because that's what everybody's talking about, getting gas, things like that. Once you connect those two things in the minds of the American people, now you've got something that's easier to understand. It may not convince all of them right away, but at least you have a way to condense that message into something that's easily digestible and understandable.
Every dollar you let the government spend is a dollar that you can't.
Mm.
That's the truth. They're going to take that dollar from you in taxes, in debt that they're going to force you to pay for eventually, or your children or your grandchildren, or it's a dollar that they're going to rob from you in the form of inflation, making it more difficult for you to pay for things. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You let the government spend all this money, you're the one who pays for it. You and me, and our neighbors and our friends, and a lot of rich people, and a lot of other people. We're all paying for this.
Yes.
It's really us against them. I don't mean to sound like it's a class warfare thing. It's just it's a group of people in Washington, politicians and bureaucrats, who live by a different set of values than you do and that I do. They
Yeah.
don't have a problem with passing on debt to future generations. They don't have a problem with inflation. And speaking of values, the third bucket is foreign policy.
Mm.
And the way that you know that your government is being led by people that have different values than you do is by looking at the decisions they make and realizing that's not what you would do. You would not have invaded Afghanistan. You would
Right.
not have invaded Iraq 20 years ago. You certainly would not have kept a heavy-handed military presence there, killing over, let this number sink in, 1 million people.
Mm.
That's not what you would do.
Mm.
I don't think there's very many Americans who would have, who would say, yeah, it was very expensive. It cost us trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
It cost 1 million lives, but it was a good idea anyway. I don't think very many people would say that. Nor do I
Especially
think
if
there
they
are
knew
examples
exactly
out
what we were
there.
doing over there too. I mean, I think a lot of people who support these wars and who did in the past, I was one of them, they didn't really understand what we were doing to these people overseas. And I think that people have kind of wised up a bit. But my question is though, I don't, and maybe don't have my finger on the pulse in this area. I'm not seeing a lot of people worrying about war except us, except libertarians. And maybe some like conservatives and progressives, they talk about it. But in general, I mean, when they go to the grocery store, people are thinking about what you were just talking about, the economics of it. Are people really thinking about war like that?
Well, I think you're right that most people focus more on economic issues, but I would suggest that there are apparently a whole lot of people out there who are upset that the United States is effectively giving a blank check to Israel to prosecute war any way that Israel wants. And the point there is not merely that the United States needs to stop prosecuting wars on our own, but we need to stop tying our foreign policy to other countries' foreign policies.
Hmm.
It does not make sense that we would take hundreds of billions of dollars from Americans and use it to project power in Ukraine just for the sake of having a proxy war with the Russian army. That's not what you would do. It's not an ethical proposition to take money from Americans forcibly, by the way, not voluntarily. Take money from Americans and use it to fight a proxy war. That's not what America is all about. It's not how Americans feel about these things. And that's why I believe a big reason why a lot of people are upset about what's going on in Israel. And I get, how so many of us feel about Israel in such a positive way. I mean, I do too. I've traveled Israel, north, south, east, west. I've traveled Palestinian territory. I've sent my son to train in Jordan, and my daughter I've sent for events in Israel, and we have traveled the Middle East together. So I have strong feelings about it too. And many of us have strong feelings based on our lives of faith, our
Sure.
strong ties to Jerusalem and the rest of Israel. I get that. But that just means more than ever, this is an opportunity to live by our principle, to make decisions not based on, good feelings towards some group of people, but as a matter of principle. We should not be taking money away from Americans and sending it abroad in the form of foreign aid to other countries just to fight a proxy war. This is not in Americans' interest. It is not in the interest of America writ large. It's a policy that has not worked the past 80 years. It's been an abject failure. There are not examples that Americans would point to and say, well, that worked out really well. Sure, it cost us billions and it cost us thousands of lives, but it was a good idea anyway. There are no examples in that category. And so as an ethical proposition, I say we got to cut it out.
Yeah, and I think that what you touched on there is something people do care about. I mean, as far as war goes, but as far as the fact that they're taking your money to send it over to Ukraine, meanwhile, you're paying double the prices for the steak that you want to buy at HEB or Kroger's or wherever you get your steaks at. So I think that that's one way to reach people.
And
Oh,
basics,
yeah,
basics
yeah, just
like
the basics.
gas,
Gas. Yeah,
your
yeah,
mortgage, your rent.
yeah.
Yeah.
All
And
all
and
of
I,
that.
I think that we ought to have a problem with that.
Yeah. So one thing that is on people's minds. And, when I look at the polling, I mean, the economy, inflation, jobs, things like that. But what about crime? Because other than education, crime is up there too. And maybe we can just tie that into criminal justice reform as well. How should
Yep.
a libertarian presidential candidate like yourself approach these issues? Like, what would be your platform on this?
We need to be supportive of the idea that people have a right to come together as a community and impose on their local police forces their own values and their own principles. People deserve a police force that aligns with their own interests. And that may be different in one community than it is in another.
Mm-hmm.
To do that, I believe that you've got to make some serious changes. And by the way, you're not going to get this from a Democrat, and you're not going to get this from a Republican. On the one side, of the Republican side, you get, back the blue in every case,
No matter what they
which
do.
is not helpful. Yeah, it's not helpful. It's dope. Not even cops say that. You know what I mean? I mean, as police officers, you know damn well who at roll call is someone who probably shouldn't be there, right?
Mm,
It's just not helpful. It's dopey. It's a way of saying reform is too hard for me. It's too complicated. I don't want to be involved. And I would say the same thing about defund the police. It's just a way of saying, I'm pissed off about the way policing is going in some places in the United States, and this is how I express it. But reform is too hard, and so I'm not going to get involved with how to do it or the details or what the objectives ought to be, what the principles ought to be. It's just too hard. I just don't find that useful. I don't find it valuable. Whereas what we need to say is we need to hold police officers accountable, police agencies accountable, and that starts by doing a couple of things profoundly differently. For starters, we need to end qualified immunity. We need to impose laws, rules. They don't have to be in law, but at the state level they can be, and that would help, that require police officers to carry their own liability insurance, just like doctors carry malpractice insurance.
mm-hmm.
We need a third party check on the system. We need an insurance company to come in and say they're not going to put up with the crap that they get from the unions, right? The unions make it very difficult to hold officers accountable,
Yes.
to get information out of the police departments. And we get why. I mean, in most cases, I think it's dopey, but at least I understand it. And no one's talking about taking away police officers' First Amendment rights. That's not what this is about. But we do need to hold the system accountable. The other thing that we need to do is change rules so that a community, whether a city or a county, can replace its agency lock, stock, and barrel with another agency if it wants to, including a private sector agency. If there's a company out there that can demonstrate it has the resources, the wherewithal, the skills, the qualifications, they should be able to bid on a contract the same way that we want school choice or any other choice. You wouldn't put up with a community not being able to contract out garbage pickup.
Right.
That's an easy one. Why should we put up with a rule that says the community can't replace its police department? It's just silly stuff from the get-go. There's no economic reason, there's no business reason, there's no law enforcement reason why everyone has to be a public sector employee. What you want is to have as great a control as you can possibly have over your officers' behavior. You need the flexibility to impose your values on your police department, not the other way around. And once in a while, that means you got to replace your police force. At the very least, you got to have the threat of replacing your police
Right.
force, right?
Right.
Just like we want competition in every other business. As a community, you wouldn't put up with bakeries, being granted a monopoly. It's just
Right.
ridiculous that we grant law enforcement agencies and schools local monopolies. It's just not very helpful.
I like that. Like, I don't know what you'd call it, but maybe like a law enforcement choice, I don't know, police choice, like school choice. I don't know. But one thing,
Yeah.
yeah, one thing,
Police agency choice.
yeah,
Where I worked, the community had a choice between the police department or they could fire all of us and hire the sheriff's office. So at least they had two choices, right? Most places don't even have two choices. Most
No, they
places
don't.
you've got the sheriff's office, love it or shove it, right? So at least our town had two choices, and they would remind us once in a while that, if we didn't behave, they could replace us altogether and hire the sheriff's office. I get it. And that's good. That's a good thing. But two is not a big number.
No, it's
The
not.
choice between two options is not a big number.
You mean
You
like we
you
have for
need
for
you need
president and
others
other
to be
offices?
able to bid.
Two choices?
Exactly. It's not enough.
You know what I
That
like?
should be our theme, right? You
It
deserve
should
more
be.
choices.
Yeah, I think, and what I like about what you're saying is that when I talk about, because I talk about police misconduct and corruption all the time, and to me, the main issue is that there is no accountability. I mean, because even like if we talk about qualified immunity, even if we remove that, a lot of these officers are still indemnified. So if they abuse their authority,
Oh,
then
of
they're not going to have to
course.
pay much out of pocket, if at all. It's the city that's going to pay that, or it's the police department that's going to pay that. But you know what? If those people know that they
Right.
can be replaced, that could add another layer of accountability, and that would be even better for police too. Because I recently wrote an article about this. Basically the headline was, "Here's why I write about corrupt police." I got a
Right.
lot of emails and comments and agreeing with me, and most of them were cops. So I'm like, yeah, because you know what, it
There you
makes them look
go.
bad too.
Of course it does. And the dirty secret that teachers and cops just can't seem to learn from economists is that a huge reason why they don't get paid more is because pay is flat, irrespective of performance. There is no differential pay for performance, and there is almost no competition for cops and for police officers. If you're the best teacher in your school, good for you. You're not going to get paid more, and it's very unlikely you're going to get a phone call from another school that says, "Holy cow, we need you on our team." That just doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen to cops either. It's because there's not enough competition among the schools and the agencies, and there's no differential pay. And we've got to get beyond that and make these industries look more like the rest of America. It is not a coincidence that we grant these businesses monopolies and then we end up frustrated with our inability to hold them accountable.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so kind of pivoting off of that, I mean, as far as law enforcement, what about crime? I mean, how would a libertarian president, again, there's only so much that you can do at the federal level, but how should crime be handled?
Crime should be handled the way your town wants it to be handled. The governor should stay out of it. The president should stay out of it. Your local politicians, look, we got to come back to this because the idea of local politicians doing a good job with anything is a bit far fetched. But the way it should work, let's at least start out with the way it should work, right? The way it should work is that your mayor, your commission, the folks that run your county should be imposing on that police force, this is how we want things done, right? Now, in some places, that's going to be, wow, crime is down. This is good living. People feel secure. What I really need you guys and you gals on our police force to do is to operate with a good attitude, a light touch. You're here to provide service. You answer your calls. You get it. In other communities, it's going to be, look, we've got a real problem. Crime is on the rise. People don't feel secure. They don't feel happy about living here. What are you people doing? Right?
Mm-hmm.
We need you to be on the ball. We need you to be more proactive. We need to be taking people to jail for theft,
Mm-hmm.
not just turning the other. It's not your job to turn the other cheek. If the store owner turns the other cheek, that's one thing.
Right.
But as police officers, it's not your job to turn the other cheek. Your job is to ask the store owner, are we pressing charges here today? And if they say yes, then you follow through with that
Right.
because the community needs to feel like you are doing what it is that we ask of you.
Okay. That makes sense. You know, and the thing is, this stuff is so common sense, but it's just so foreign to the way we've been brought up. because we're used to the idea of competition when we go get something from the store or order something on Amazon, but we're not used to it. Even with education. I mean, we know that there's private schools and things like that, but we don't think about applying that same principle to law enforcement and other areas of government when really when you think about it, it makes sense.
Of course it does. And of course, we do have private schools, but they're largely for wealthy people. They're largely
Yeah.
for rich people, people with high incomes, because our public schools are free to people because they take the money from everybody through property taxes and they don't charge you the tuition. And they don't make that money available to the private sector institutions, which is completely silly. There's no economic reason why you would advantage the schools that are in the public sector. It just makes no sense whatsoever. And so there's not really honest competition. And in most places, you don't have private schools. I can
Yeah.
remember, most of District 20 in Florida is not well off. It's really in many places heavily impoverished.
Mm.
Many people feel good about their schools, I hasten to add, but they recognize they're not very good. And then half the people are not happy with their public schools. Okay, so you talk about school choice in a place like this, thinking you're going to get some traction. And what you would hear is, well, it doesn't mean anything to me because we don't have any private schools. Okay.
Yeah.
The
That
reason
happened in
you don't
Texas.
have any private schools is because all the money is hoarded only for the public schools.
Mhm.
Trust me when
Yeah.
I say, my friends in Tamarack, Florida, trust me when I say, if you had a completely open school choice program, the Archdiocese of Miami would be all over you like white on rice. That is an organization that knows how to make money. They know an
Yes, it
opportunity when they
is.
see it. I'm telling you the truth. And I love them. I mean, I grew up Lutheran. So, I
Yeah.
grew up spending a lot of years making fun of Catholics, but they're our best friends in some sense. But that is an organization that would be in Broward County providing service. And so would the Lutheran Church. So would, the Baptist Church. And so would a whole lot of other organizations that are not affiliated with churches. Some very expensive, some very specialized, focused on certain needs or certain styles of education. You would have choice. The reason you don't have any choice is because you don't have a school choice program.
Mm, mm. And you're in Florida saying this too. Like, that might get you in trouble because everybody's like, "Oh, Florida does everything right."
Well, not schools. Their schools suck.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, I mean, and
And
that's
I
a
know I sent kids to public schools there. And I sent my kids to private schools, going back and forth at different years, different times. And I worked as a substitute at dozens of high schools in
mm,
the public sector. And I was involved with, my daughter went to a Catholic high school. My son went to a public high school. I know the difference, right? And that's not to say that any institution is perfect. I mean, we had our problems in the Catholic school just like we had
yeah.
problems in the public school. There are, well, that's a whole nother podcast, right?
Yeah.
But at least, there was a choice. But that's only because, we were working our butts off to scrape the money for tuition. Most families didn't have a choice because they couldn't afford it.
Mm, wow. Wow. Yeah, and you're right. That could be a whole other podcast, but there are just two more issues I want to hit with you. Let's talk about immigration. I mean, what's interesting is that you guys in the whole field have vastly different views on immigration and how that should look. I mean, you got Chase Oliver who wants the Ellis Island model. You got Rechtenwald who's more hawkish. Where do you fall on that spectrum when it comes to immigration?
Well, more like Ellis Island. I don't think Ellis Island sums up the complexity of the problem. We need to be able to say two things at once. On the one hand, we need to be able to say legal immigration is good for America.
Mhm.
It just is. And I'm willing to have that argument with anybody, anytime, any
Yeah.
day, any week. It is good for America economically. It is good for us in terms of entrepreneurship. It's good for us culturally. It's good for our society. It is one of those things that defines America, that effectively differentiates us from other democracies around the world. It's what makes America so pluralistic. It's where our tolerance for other cultures comes from. It's extremely important. It's even good for us financially, as long as you don't do something stupid like pass out free money to everybody coming over the border. Having said that, and a lot of people are, so, they got to cut that dopiness out.
Yep.
Having said that, it is also true that illegal immigration is bad for America. And it's bad for America in a couple of different ways for a couple of different reasons. And the big one, I learned this going out to the Arizona-Mexico border last year. I spent a couple of days there. I met with Border Patrol and the sheriff's office and ranchers who have property on the border and a lot of libertarian thought leaders. And I came away really negatively impressed, stunned by the extent to which we have a humanitarian crisis with people coming over the border and effectively being sold into indentured servitude. As you may know, most Americans who come into the United States come in illegally. And most people who come in illegally come in through some form of human trafficking.
Yeah.
It's a gang on the Mexican side, a coyote, and they're handed over to someone on the American side through one of these phone-based apps, right? You don't know who the hell you're dealing with. That's when things go wrong. And all too often it winds up in one of these forms of effectively modern slavery. And it's every bit as horrific as you might use your imagination to conjure.
Yeah.
This is evil stuff. This is stuff that we need to shut down. It's not a good policy. It's not a good look. It's not a good foreign policy. It's bad for America. It's bad for these people, their families. It's horrible. This needs to be shut down. But this is what happens when you create a black market. As we know, whether we're talking about immigration or prostitution or drugs, when you make something illegal that the society isn't ready to have criminalized, you create a black market, and black markets are dangerous. Black markets kill people.
Right.
And that's what happens at our border. People come in, it's dangerous, they're dying. Yes, indentured servitude. The other problem is that when people get into the United States, we tell them, whether you come in illegally or legally, we tell them you can't work. I find that wholly backwards.
Yeah.
I think our policy should be more like, you better get to work.
Yeah.
I'd be more comfortable with a policy that says, I'm going to call you in 6 weeks and make sure you have a job. Because this is not about, people coming into the United States because you think that this is some weird gravy train. That's not how any of this works.
Right.
You need to get a job. And what goes wrong is we tell them they can't work legally. They're going to work anyway. Of course they're going to work. They have to work, right? It's like telling people not to breathe. They're going to work. But because they can't work legally, corporations take advantage of them. Farms take advantage of them, right? People take advantage. They pay them dirt wages. This is somewhat ironically, I would tell my Republican and Democratic friends, this is what undermines the wage structure in the United States. It's not too many people coming in. It's people coming in and working for pennies. That's what lowers the wage rate for everybody. If you would bring them in, tell them, get your butt to work, you have permission. You don't have to settle for pennies on the dollar. Don't undermine our wage structure. Get to work and compete and be a part of the American economy. That's good for us. So, in my view, we need to stop illegal immigration, and we need to vet people across the border legally much faster. There's no economic reason. There's no technological reason why it should take weeks and months and years to vet someone. If you're on a list, right? If your home country is looking for you on a felony warrant, I get that, right? Maybe this is not the right person for us.
Yeah.
But if you're not on a list, we should be able to vet someone in rapidly, get them to work. Welcome to America.
And that's been an issue in New York City. I mean, because they've been dealing with the border crisis. I mean, there's lots of migrants being shipped there, and they haven't really been able to work because they don't have permission. And so the mayor's been trying to get them permission. It's just a whole administrative cluster, you know what? Because you've got all these people who are, living off of the government, and in New York, they're like handing out prepaid cards instead of just letting them work. They actually want to work, but they just don't have the permission to do so.
Of course they do.
Yes.
It's so stupid. Every aspect of this is nothing but bad public policy.
Yeah. Yeah. So the last thing I want to talk about is the campaign itself. Your third party if you get the nomination, you'll be the third party candidate. But you've also got, the Green Party, you've got Cornel West, you've got RFK Jr., who, by the way, recently said that he's not going to seek the Libertarian nomination. And I am so glad, because I was so sick of all these Libertarian simps just simping all over him. And yeah, I'm venting a little bit, Mike. I'm sorry. This really bothered me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm like, what the hell's wrong with you?
I don't like it.
Yeah, but
I'm not an RFK guy. I wasn't having it.
Me neither. The dude's a leftist progressive Democrat who wants to lock people up for opposing climate change and take our guns. Okay, this is about my soapbox. But so how would a libertarian presidential candidate differentiate himself in this current environment where you've got him and you've got others, and then you've still got the two geriatric folks, Trump and Biden, duking it out? How do you carve out a niche that will attract enough voters to make a big splash?
I think that you need to completely differentiate on policy and remind people that the big differentiating factor is that their values don't align with those other goofballs. If you join the Republican Party because you believe in free markets, because you believe in free trade, because you believe in fiscal conservatism, because you believe in policies that help economic growth and help people make more money, you and your party have gone in two different directions. I'm sorry. Bless your heart. I was in the Republican Party once too, but that just doesn't represent where you are anymore. Not your fault. Your party has gone somewhere else, right? They're out in the lobby. And I would say the same thing to Democrats. Most of the people in my family are Democrats. They joined that party thinking, gee, here's a group of politicians who would stand up for our First Amendment rights, who would stand up for social liberalism rather than forcing everyone to march lockstep in unison on sing from the same hymnal, no matter what the policy is, that might stand up for an anti-war policy once in a while. Man, you and your party have really gone in two different directions. If you still believe in those values, as I'm sure you do, right? If you joined one of those parties, welcome home to the Libertarian Party, because we're still here. We haven't gone anywhere. We are the philosophical descendants of the people that put together the Constitution, wrote the Declaration of Independence, who believe in a pluralistic democracy representing your interests, not the interest of a group of politicians and bureaucrats in Washington. If you really want change, you're going to have to vote your values for a change instead of just voting for some party out of momentum and habit. You need to vote for the third party, not a third party. We are the third party. And, let's be honest, Robert Kennedy seems like a pleasant fellow. He's not a complete stooge. He's not an idiot, but his policies don't come from a place of principle. He's all anti-war until, oh, okay, this war I like. Oh, okay. Oh, well, that's all right. He's all about disentangling corporations and the federal government. Well, except when it comes to the environment, then I want the government telling corporations exactly what they should do, all day long. And he'll stand up for your civil liberties sometimes, not with regard to your Second Amendment rights. Then no, forget it. Which, by the way, I think is really weird, because so often it's pointed out, well, his dad was brutally assassinated, a terrible thing. His uncle, the same. but those were not random events, because someone was able to get their hands on a gun. That's got nothing to do with the Second Amendment. That's a whole nother podcast, but let's just agree that had nothing, that's got nothing to do with what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, that's not
That's
because we
a
have a gun
horrible and
violence
weird
problem.
thing.
Yeah, that's a totally different animal.
That is a whole different animal, and his family has been subjected to violence because of their beliefs, not because people had too much access to weapons. So the whole thing just smacks of political opportunism. And I would say the same thing about vaccines. He agrees with us the government shouldn't have the right to force you to take a vaccine. Good for him. He got one right. The problem is it's based on the fact that he doesn't like the vaccines.
Mm.
Okay, well, what if he did like the vaccine? Uh-oh.
Time to get the jab.
For a libertarian, it doesn't matter how good the vaccine is. You can take all the vaccines you want. Maybe I'll take all the vaccines I want. Maybe I'll take them all. Maybe I won't take any, but the government doesn't have the right to tell me to take it no matter how damn good the vaccine is.
Exactly. So I think that that's all the questions that I had. But if you want to make any closing comments, or if there's something that I didn't bring up that you want to talk about, now's your chance. And also let everybody know where they can find you and where they can support you.
Well, I appreciate that. I do think that we covered many of the biggest issues. I'm really grateful for you having me on your show today. It's been a great pleasure. Look, I would encourage everyone to go to one of two websites. You can go to MikeTremont.com. The problem with MikeTremont.com is it's hard to spell because there's two A's in Tremont, right? So you can go to MikeTremont.com. That's the basic website for the campaign. You can learn a lot there. It's very fun. Or you can go to the website of our platform. Our platform, we take very seriously, Jeff. It's got its own URL and its own website. It's called goldnewdeal.org. The name of our platform is the Gold New Deal. We're talking about repealing the original New Deal. We're making fun of AOC's Green New Deal a little bit here, obviously. Talking
This doesn't
about
have cattle parks in
fundamentally
it, though, right?
changing the relationship. Yep. We're fundamentally changing the relationship between us and the government. And so Gold New Deal is our platform website. It's very fun. I think people really enjoy seeing it.
Awesome. Well, great. I'm glad that you came on. This was a great interview. I had a really good time. But I got to get you back on again sometime soon.
Let's speak in June.
You got it. Thank you very much for coming on.